Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Real Talk, Family Life, Building Shatterproof Families One Brick at a Time. It is a pleasure to be here once again, and we are grateful to see you guys joining us online. This week, we're starting a new topic. We're examining how to deal with conflict in the home, particularly paying attention to how we resolve conflicts, how we manage expectations, and prevent future conflicts. Joining us tonight are pastors Joseph Griffith, Reverend Anthony Henry, and we have a few guests who will be joining us shortly, Mr. Javon Andrew, among others. As they join us, we will ask them to introduce themselves. So, Pastor Griffith, you're no stranger to this program. I'm just going to ask you, for those who might be joining us for the first time, to introduce yourself.
Hello, good evening. You already know my name, Pastor Griffith, Joseph Griffith. I'm a support member of this forum. From the beginning, I'm still riding on with it. And I am a Christian for well over 40 years. Of course, I'm a pastor. I love the Lord. I have a family. And I think that is enough about me at the moment. Thank you very much.
And of course, Pastor Henry is no stranger to us, but again, for persons who might be joining us for the first time, whether on Zoom or on YouTube, Pastor Henry, you can introduce yourself.
Good evening, Dr. Sutherland, and to everyone. It's nice having you this evening. I have been serving the Lord for a number of years. I've been in ministry for just almost 50 years. God has been very good to me, and I have a very strong love for families, and for more so to see families live the way that God wants us to live. I believe it's the greatest way of conveying the gospel message in this day and age, when we have strong families, when we have families that are in the community that are sharing and living the word of God. And so the reason for the program, and glad to be a part of it.
Thank you. So tonight we're dealing with conflict in the family. It's a topic that we visited before. We did a general outline of how you listen with understanding and empathy, etc. But I think this topic is so pertinent because of what we're seeing in the world today. We're seeing families living in discord. We're seeing empty shell marriages. We're seeing children hurt. And so I think, this is a good time for us to revisit this topic, but with a clear outline of how we engage with conflicts, given some practical examples of how we manage conflict and how we work towards resolutions, even in the most extreme scenarios. And when I think of conflict as a term, I see so many connotations that surface, right? I think of the coworker that gets on my last nerve because they don't hand in their deadlines on time. When I think of family and conflicts, I think of my brothers and my sisters who drive me crazy for no reason, or my children who wait until we're about to leave home to remember that they needed to do something or they forgot something. We might consider our partners, our husbands, who won't put the cap back on the toothpaste. Or my mother or my father, who always has an opinion on how I perform as an adult, as a wife, as a mother. And I see these more so as manifestations of conflict and not necessarily a definition of conflict. So when I think of conflicts, I know it can be physical. We see the war in Ukraine. It might be mental or emotional, a disagreement over a particular topic, or it might be abstract, it might be epistemological. Why are we here? Is it good or evil? So I'm going to ask you to define family conflict or conflict for us, and then we'll go towards it. We will go towards a definition that relates to family. Before you answer that question, I see Mr. Andrew is on. Javon, good night. We are so excited to have you. And for those persons who might be joining us for the first time, we're just going to ask you to introduce yourselves in 30 seconds or less. Go.
All right, so seeing that you just mentioned me, Dr. Sutherland, I'm going to go first. Good night, everybody, and welcome to the program. My name is Javon Andrew. I am a current student at the UV Caville campus. I am Grenadian, and for people who haven't seen me on this program before, I am actually the grandson of Pastor Henry, one of the coordinators of this program.
Fantastic. Javon, thank you. And of course, Cave Hill is my alma mater. So, Yuri, oi, oi, oi. I hope you're getting all A's and doing well. So we're defining conflict, and Javon is especially here tonight to talk about it from an adolescent, young adult perspective, relationships with parents, relationships with siblings, relationships, with close friends, etc. So Pastor Griffith, if I can come to you, how would you define conflict, and then give us your thoughts on conflict within the family?
Good night again. As I begin to look at this subject, I was forced to refer to what the professionals say about conflict. And I found some very interesting words came up. I'm not trying to mention them all, but words like opposing actions of incompatibles, divergent ideas, interests of persons, opposing needs, drives, wishes, external, whatever. Words like collision, disagreement, variance, fight, contend, battle. And originally I heard the topic of managing conflict in the family. And even now, and in the partial definition, I just use those words, I am still wondering whether conflict is what we should be managing, and if conflict itself is manageable. I am of strong opinion that conflict don't want managing, I think that we are using conflict as a scapegoat for our own indiscretions. And I challenge anybody to disagree with me, because I know it's difficult to admit the truth. The problem, conflict is an expression of our individual indiscretions, and I will defend that later on. I pause.
Pastor Henry.
His mic is off.
The origin of conflicts actually start with us, so that what Pastor Griffith said about conflicts, all the thing about the negatives and the feelings and the, all of that starts inside of all of us, right? So that if I have a thought that does not align with what holds in the society, if I think differently, the society doesn't really have a conflict with me, but I have a conflict with the society. And so oftentimes when we talk of conflict within the family, it is the person who has a varying view to the others. It is a person who wants to see something done differently. And so that conflict rests within that person. If that person never voices the disagreement that they hold, if that person never voices the pain that they may be experiencing because things are done differently, the others would not have any conflict. It is when the one person who is in a position where they are not comfortable and has to express that, is feeling that, and that thought is bothering them, then the conflict starts.
Mm-hmm. And Javon?
Right. I tend to agree, and I don't want to be too redundant, but to me, I think conflict is something that is quite inevitable. Like Pastor Henry just said, it arises because of differences, right? The simple matter of me being a specific being and someone else probably having a different way of thinking means that at some point there would be some form of conflict. And as we're speaking about conflict within the family, it is important as well, because I think even though you live under the same roof, not everyone inside that family is going to think the exact same way. Remember, we've all come from different places. We think differently. And even though we have a same set of models or values that we may follow, certain little things are groomed separately and personally, so we won't necessarily think exactly the same way. So I think trying to avoid conflict, no, conflict is actually healthy. I think it's just a matter of how we deal with it. Communication is a huge aspect as well. That's something that we would probably discuss further into the program. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but that's basically my point of view.
Okay. So I think, Javon, you lead straight into the next point. So I'm going to start with you still, because I'm thinking familial conflicts are inevitable, whether parent and child, whether spouses, or whether children together. And it's unpleasant, and it causes us sometimes to do or say things that we regret. So I want to talk about familial conflict. And as you say, communication is important. So if you were to discuss with us what our posture should be when dealing with conflict, whether you want to give us guidelines or an example of your experiences with that. And what I love is that you are now a young adult at university, but you're still a ward for your parents. So how do you balance your newfound quote unquote freedom as a young adult at university, charting your own course that your parents would have prepared you for, with perhaps a disagreement in understanding or disagreement in belief system over something very simple, or it could be something big. How do you manage conflicts now when you return home?
I like that question a lot, actually. And interestingly enough, I think one of the most important things to do, particularly when dealing with conflict, is having an open mind, right? Because I personally would have experienced situations where I would probably have an issue that I'll be dealing with my parents. And I would feel like there's a certain level of understanding on my level that they're not getting. But at the same time, now that I look back on a couple of the situations, no, right? I would look back and I would realize, but wait, there was actually some merit in what it is they were saying. I needed to probably see it from their perspective a little bit more. So having that open mind where it is, you're not just, all right, this is my idea and my point of view, and that's it. It helps when it comes to dealing with conflict, because there's this balance where it is either party can express what the issue may be and also probably try to find a solution on the inside. That probably has happened on quite a few occasions, if I'm being very honest, and it's only natural, like I said, right? Mm-hmm. But it also happens as well on a sibling basis, because I would be very honest with you, it happens with siblings, and it's probably worse to deal with it as siblings, because I think kids have a bias and that you cannot change it unless an adult intervenes, let's be honest. So I've actually had that encounter with my two younger sisters on many occasions. And at points of intervention from my parents, I used to be counseled as the eldest child. I needed to start seeing things differently so I'll be able to deal with certain conflicts a lot better. Mm-hmm. And honestly, as I've grown through the adolescent stage to the point where I'm now a young adult, I could actually look at it and see my progression through the years, from as early as the age of probably 13, come up to my age right now, So it's a very entertaining question. Trust me, I could probably go on talking a lot about this, but mm-hmm. That's just a simple brief on my interaction in terms of conflict and dealing with it, both on the parent-child basis and the sibling basis as well.
Okay, thank you. So to Pastors Griffith and Henry, I want to ask you, from counseling perspective, what should our posture be when dealing with conflict within the home? If you can give us a synopsis on that, and perhaps answer at the same time, if we can determine how the conflict that happens is resolved, can we change the other person, or is it incumbent on us to simply manage ourselves?
My approach, I do not know how far I can get in discussion if I do not state my further understanding of conflict, because we keep coming up, and I keep hearing the idea of conflict being good, or it can be good, that is, you know. And for me differently, I am a little shy about adopting the goodness of conflict, because from my growing up and from my own experience, and even now, when I think about conflict, it is something that got me hot and mad and can't sleep and restless. In other words, war has already erupted. Somebody say the horse is out of his stable already. And if that is this is how I see conflict, others may say it differently, all right? And I'm saying that when we can recognize that this is what conflict is. In other words, we have had a problem, we've had differences, we've had whatever, but now we have come to a position where parties are holding strong position and nobody don't seem to want to give in. And therefore, blood is being drawn. And so I think that for most people, that is the situation has progressed to a deadly stage at that stage. So how we respond to it will be just like, a matter of fact, I would say that when people come to you at that way, they're crawling, they're hot, it's almost even like when people write a divorce. They come to you, when they come to you, they already say, look, we got, you know, but the last straw. All right. So I believe, and I'll pause on this, that I believe that conflict should be compared like fire. The fire is already burning, and we need to be able to deal with it. And just how fire has the necessary components that are necessary to be there, the oxygen, the fuel, what else? Oxygen, fuel, and whatever else, right? That if we can identify these things, then we will keep them separate, and then we'll be able to deal and address the issue at the table, because war already declared. I pause.
So that the oxygen and the fuel that creates the conflict originated in the Garden of Eden. Not the eating of the tree or of the fruit, but the desire to be God. And every conflict where there is a conflict, somebody has that desire. I want to be God. I want to be right. My way or the highway. And the other person does not want to submit to that sort of a behavior. And so there is conflict. As I said, it's all in your mind, so that the thought that you have in your mind, it begins to create the conflict about the other person. You know, one of the examples that I use is that you are in an area where you have had reports of, you know, criminal activities, and you're at your gate one night, late in the night, locking up, and you see somebody coming towards your gate with a hoodie on the head. And already in your mind, you are wishing that you have a firearm somewhere on your side so that, you know, you can defend yourself. Well, the person is just lost in the area. The person just wants guidance to find their way out. But already you have gotten to where Pastor Griffith has already spoken about, where the heat has already built, where the whole thing has already escalated, even before you hear the other side of the party. Even before you hear what the other person has to say, you have already created that sort of a thing. So that in the first place, if we are going to, the conflict is healthy, because I need to, you know, if for some reason that, you know, there is break-ins and somehow there isn't something in me that stimulates me to want to protect myself. If that isn't within me, then, I'm going to be run over, I'm going to be killed, I'm going to be made a fool. So that the whole idea of the mind triggering that defense, that flight or fight mechanism, it is good, but it is only good when it is controlled. Right? When we lose control of ourselves, then we are actually open to all sorts of conflicts with other people. But even when somebody has now the conflict towards me, and I understand what the person may be going through, I am in a better position to de-escalate. Right? And it is good in the sense also that, if when that person comes to me and I discover that the person is all good intent and does not have any bad, I should be able to say to the person, this is how I felt at the time when I saw you come in. This is how my blood pressure began to raise because I thought you were, not what you were supposed to be or what you are. And so in that sense, we need to be able to recognize the conflict within us if we are going to be able to deal with it within the family.
You see, the other point I didn't mention was the idea of heat. Pastor just mentioned it, the heat, and what I would like us to understand, right, is and I like the analogy, and I will stick there tonight. The house is on fire, and if somebody or people don't somehow begin to separate the things that's causing the fire to, the pastor just said, escalate. The end, maybe nobody turning it in, and all we can lose. And I would let us understand and see conflict as the house on fire, and we got to decide if we can let it burn down or we can get together, put the differences one side, and out the fire. I pause.
So I'm hearing you both, and I'm understanding the way in which we should see conflict. My question before we move on is, should we even see the first indicator of us disagreeing as that house on fire? Because I'm thinking that by the time you see a house on fire, it has to be all gone. And I'm like, so nobody smelled the smoke, nobody saw the spark. And so I think that happens a lot in families. I'm sharing a room with a brother or sister, and every evening I come in and their clothes is on my bed and I pick it up and I throw it on their bed. But then the day that we get to blows is the conflict that I'm seeing. But we hadn't addressed the simple issues where, can you please respect my space and keep your clothes on your side of the room? And then if you're talking about spouses, OMG, please to put the toothpaste cap down. Please to turn down the seat when you're done. Please to just wash the one dish that you used in the sink so that by the time I lash out at you, it may not even be the thing that I'm arguing about at that point in time, but it might have been a culmination of everything else that happened in the lead up. And so where do we see the indicators and say, it may seem simple now, but if we don't nip it in the bud, so to speak, or address it, it might become an issue later on. So Pastor Griffith, I see you nodding. So
no, I just spoke, I remember a little thing we learned at church in Sunday school, the little foxes that spoil the vine. And I believe that the family is so important, all right? That the responsibility is on every one of us to recognize that the family has to be bigger than me. It has to be bigger than me, right? And I need to be aware, and I need to be aware of those little things that can potentially threaten, all right? It's just like a person I relate, if you got a house, you got to walk around the house regularly. Because if you don't walk around the house, the damage can start from small and progress and get big, right? So it's absolutely important that we first of all understand family must mean something to us. It must be. I have always thought about the amount of effort we put in work, trying to achieve things, you know what I mean? And then you hear the daughter say, you said, daddy say, I gave you all this here. I sacrificed so much for you. And then daughter can say, but daddy, I didn't want that. I want to spend time with me, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm saying we need to understand how important the family is and to identify those things that start to undermine us. Just before we began the program, I mentioned the idea of a sermon I heard years ago, many years ago, the deceptiveness of the gradual. And I paused by saying, we need to understand that it starts small and become big. Let me start addressing the small things early.
Okay. And so, Javon, I'm going to come back to you in terms of addressing and resolving conflicts within the family, from simple challenges to major fallouts, whether that is by understanding, communication, empathy. And I know you are big on communication. So I want to ask you to speak a bit more about that in terms of beginning to address or resolve conflicts in the family. Why do you think communication, or why is, not that you think, but why is communication so important?
Right. So I kind of lit up when I started hearing you ask the question, actually, because I do agree conflict happens in stages, and it's quite useful to be able to identify it from an early stage so that it doesn't get to the point, like we illustrated, the burning house, where it's already too late, you cannot save it, right? And there are indicators of it. I think person's reactions, and I'm speaking from experience here, is one way. I mean, sometimes parents tend to ignore certain things. I'm speaking here particularly from the parent-child relationship. Some things parents might consider as small, but to the child, it's not. And really and truly, if there's a compilation of small things happening that the parents don't deem as important, sooner or later, be a breaking point for that child. I personally had that at some point, where certain things were deemed, small. But to me, it wasn't. I felt invaded every now and then when I had little issues with my siblings, and would bring it to them. But I don't know if because there was this expectation that as this child, I should be able to deal with it. But I was at an age where I felt like I didn't need to, so I would bring it up so that it could be dealt with. Wasn't necessarily done probably in the way that I would want it to have been done. And then after a while, when I felt like nothing was being done, I would sometimes take it into my own hands. And that's where we got to a point where the conflict was great, and then we had a bigger situation to deal with. So I think being able to see from the onset and dealing with it, hitting the nail on the head from early up is quite important. It's very important. This communication aspect, I honestly believe, particularly as parents, there's a responsibility to try and get that out, because I would be honest, there are some children who are very reserved and probably wouldn't say they're experiencing challenges and conflicts, and they wouldn't say anything, and then all of a sudden you experience them with certain attitudes. They would flare up out of nowhere and you'll be like, but this is not the character traits I'm accustomed to seeing. What's happening? But really and truly, it's just because they're probably not as expressive as other persons, and they probably have little conflicts happening. So I think it's important to talk. Talking is very important, like I said, right? And funny enough, communication doesn't always just need to happen verbally. Like I said, the signs, there are certain actions that will be given off. It's just important that everybody is somewhat open. Like Pastor Griffith said, that's why you have to know how valued family is to you. Because I believe anyone who prioritizes their family, they would make a special effort to ensure that situations are not arising. They don't get to a point where it is we're burning down the house. I personally shout my dad out here because he's one of those individuals who, he's a psychologist, by the way, so he comes from that background where it is, he understands that, and he does his very best to make sure that, before problems get to a very bad place, we try to make sure and alleviate those issues quite early. Or even if we get to that place, there's a certain level of neutrality and also add air for every single person in that situation so that there's no form of bias, and that the conversation, well, not the conversation, but the issue at hand can be resolved pretty efficiently.
If I may come back in quickly there, I really believe that we are all individuals and we all have needs, and we must be allowed to, is the word individuate? We to become ourselves individuals. We need to allow people to be that. But yet, I said it differently. We still need to understand that we are part of this unit. All right. So while the entire group need to recognize that this person and we individually need to develop ourselves, what becomes more important is how do we also hold the family together. So you have a right, I have a right to get my needs met. We all have that. Otherwise, we can never live together. All right. But on the other hand, we also need to preserve the family. So somehow it seems as though there has to be a stage when we are able to distinguish when this specific thing is about me and to what extent does it undermines the overarching, the thing that is my safety place, the thing that means the world to me, right? I think that is important. I pause.
Dr. Sutherland, let me jump back here. I think I got my computer charged after all. Communication is key in a relationship. And good communication is not necessarily what you say. It is what you hear. And more so, it is what you feel the other person is saying to you, what you understand the other person is saying to you. And so the good communicator is one who learns to listen, and not just to listen, but to listen to feel what the other person is saying. First, you are listening to understand, and by that, there are times when you will have to simply ask for clarification. Because you may, especially when it becomes male and female, some of us may not understand how different the languages are. We are speaking the same language, but something that a woman may say will be differently would be understood differently by a man, and vice versa. And so you have to, in those moments, don't take it for granted that you understand what the person is saying, but you try to get from them or try to help them to understand what you understand by what they're saying. So that when there is a conflict, I am telling you what you have just told me, I am repeating it to you how I understand it. And of course, in setting the tone for relieving, for dealing with the conflict, there should be ground rules, and that should be a part of the ground rule. We will communicate. We will not shout. We will not raise our voice above each other, because communication breaks down at that point. And so the whole idea then is to feel what the person is saying, to avoid the accusatory you. This is what you did, instead of this is how you made me feel as a result of what was done. And so again, we are taking the position of the human beings and trying to disband the feeling of being God. This is what I say, this is how it is, and this is how it's supposed to be. Only God alone should take that position. And so in resolving conflicts, we have to try to understand each other and try to talk to each other in such a way that we are able to resolve the issue that is at hand. And again, let me just drop this in communicating. You cannot resolve a conflict by dealing with the myriads of problems that may have contributed to the conflict. If you understand what I mean. So that you spoke just now about the spoon and the dishes that weren't thing and what have you. If that is what causes the conflict, deal with that. But if you leave all of those to pile up and then you reach to a situation where you're not even sure now what is causing the conflict, it's going to be very difficult to resolve conflict. And so that's why I'm saying it's good to have the conflict within you, because you know that it's the dishes that have been left unwashed for weeks and for days. And I want to talk about that. I want to get that off of my chest. I want us to come to some resolution through talking as to how I can have this situation resolved.
Pastor Henry, I want to stay here for a minute, and I see Pastor Francis is on. So Pastor Francis, at any point that you want to join the conversation, please feel free. I want to stay there because we wanted to go deeper with this conflict within the family on this second iteration, and changing behaviors is difficult. So I am 50 years old in a marriage, and you were saying to me that I need to communicate, right? I need to speak to my wife or my husband so that I not just hear and I not just listen, but I must listen with understanding. And I can hear you because you're speaking English. But my posture is I must be in control. And as a parent, I am the one who is right. And children, I'm still stuck in that mindset that children must be seen and not heard. How do I even begin to change my posture when it comes to, I really do want to work on this change? How do I say, you have annoyed me? And you see, I'm using you have, as opposed to saying, I feel annoyed, or I get annoyed, or I am upset when this happens because How do I even begin to practice or to change those behaviors?
Bell Hooks said that she wrote a book on the will to change, and I encourage anybody to get a copy of it. It's little pieces. You recognize where the problem is, and you start doing little pieces, identifying when you miss the mark, when you fail, when you fall short, and you constantly go back at it until it becomes habitual. At first, it becomes difficult for those who are into exercise regularly. It's not difficult to run around the savannah or to walk around the savannah here in Trinidad, or to go out and do a 45 minutes walking. It's not difficult. But if you are not accustomed to doing it, try doing it the first evening for an hour. Try walking for an hour for the first evening at a brisk pace. And you are going to realize how your body is going to reject such an effort. Do it after 40 days. Force the body to do it. Tell yourself, this is good for me. I need the exercise. I need to do it. Force it. Go past the pain. And I tell you, there is going to be pain. Go past the pain in what you want to achieve. And after 40 or 40 days, at least, you keep doing it, you realize, hey, I have a new habit. I feel that I am not myself when I don't go and do my walk, when I don't do my exercise. I'm not myself. But to get started, it takes time. And so that once you recognize that you need to change a habit, as painful as it may be, make the effort until you get a new habit formed by keep doing over what is right over and over and over and over again.
You see, that is why I like the idea, the imagery of fire. And we need, even like war. Do you understand? I think we've all been watching the Ukraine war. I mean, I just can't imagine all you, like me, you be tired. Your house, the bank, everything lick up, and you're already old and retired, and you got nothing else. War is costly, and I just think that it is like conflict is like fire, and conflict is like war. And if we understand that, I think what Pastor Harry was saying will become a lot easier. In other words, it is too much at stake for me not to do something, and I keep saying that we must always understand, right? That the things of real value that cost a lot. You understand what I'm saying? If the family is so important, if my health, let me get here, if my health, let me pause a little bit. Health in the sense of all the stressors that come about when we under that. Come back later. But if we can understand what is at stake, it is almost like a do or die. So you get daughter says, listen, brother man, let me tell you something, you know, you got diabetes way bad. And you got hope only if you stop eating sugar for the next 6 months. Or you're dead in 2 weeks. I will bet you that the man who let this sweetie can stop eating because you understand what is at stake. And that will give him the motivation. The question is, how do we motivate ourselves to be willing to pay the cost? And I keep saying, the amount of money, the amount we are willing to sacrifice, the amount we are willing to give up reflects how much we value. So we decide.
And I just being cheeky here, right? But we tend to be very selfish person. So we hope that, as you said, the family means enough to us that we're willing to work on it. So I just want to open for comment before we go to Javon and Pastor Francis to see if they want to add anything to this part of the discussion. If you do have a question, a query, a concern, please feel free to use the chat function. If you're on YouTube and you do have a question, query, or comment as well, we are looking out for it so that we can pose it to the panelists. So we're talking about dealing with conflict in the family, managing expectations. One of the things, you know, Pastor Griffith, again, going back to your point about the things we value, we work for. I'm gonna touch on what Pastor Henry usually speaks about in terms of agreements, you know, setting a vision and goal, etc., for the family. But I'm going to channel it towards Javon and Pastor Francis. And the question I'm going to ask is, why is it that people often try to resolve conflicts so that they win or they feel better? And is that, you know, have you done that in the past, I guess is the question that I want to ask. Have you tried to resolve conflict within your family so that you win or so that you feel better? Or do you ascribe to the more self-sacrificial, selfless approach to resolving conflict? And then I want to go back to Pastor Henry, depending on the responses we get, to ask you to speak about, you know, the win-win, win-lose ideas of resolving conflicts within the family, and give us some practical scenarios, at least one practical scenario in which you might have to lose to win. So Pastor Francis, if you're there, if not, Javon, I'm going to come to you and then back to Pastor Henry.
Okay, Dr. Sutherland, thank you for allowing me to voice my opinion. I came in a bit late, so I don't know where we are, but if I could partially answer what you said, the question is, why? Anytime we enter into conflict, we want to bring about a resolution to the conflict. Anytime we enter into it with an argumentative spirit, we want to win. So when we argue to win. When we discuss to resolve and to help. And the moment we enter into it, with that spirit of argument, an argumentative spirit, that means I am out to win and I will go all the way to win. So the first thing, one of the things, one of the things we must do is to enter in it, to discuss, to bring about a resolution, to cause peace to prevail in this hostile environment. And we will be able to sit down and discuss things. Another thing that we must do, because I don't know where we are, where you were before, but let me just say this here. We can never, or we will never change what we are not willing to confront. We wouldn't change it. And sweeping things under the carpet, it does not mean that has gone away. You just give it more time, because the carpet will get uneven for you to trip over it. And the last thing I will say, that there are some words that confuse us. I don't want to say if it confuses us, but sometimes they, as I usually say, the regular dictionary, for me, does not do justice for me to explain it, so I have to come up with my own definitions. There's 3 words that I looked at very carefully: is confrontation, communication, and confusion. And sometimes we think that confrontation is bad, but healthy confrontation is very good. And when I chime in, when I turn on, I heard Pastor Henry was making a valid point. Sometimes it is the lack of healthy confrontation that causes confusion. So we leave it there, and there is a nice example I usually give. I give it with my wife and I. So don't take it as something real. So tomorrow I hear it all over Facebook, pastor say this is what, I'm joking now. Let us pretend that I have the habit of putting my shoes when I come home in the middle of the living room. And my wife is angry, she is vexed, she is fuming over it. Sometimes she takes it and she throws it under the bed, but she wouldn't tell me. I shouldn't make that example with me, because you're just going to say, anyhow, she wouldn't
That's
tell
all right.
me.
That's all right, Pastor John. Most of us men have the problem.
Yeah. So she wouldn't tell me because she feels that if she tells me about it, I will feel that she doesn't love me. But she has all this thing pent up. And let me say something. Once we have left the pot on the stove, it does not matter how low the stove is turned down. Once it remains there over time, it's going to come to a boiling point. It's going to come to and that boiling point is going to means in this unbearable. So when when she acts on this shoes that is left continuously in the living room, when something else comes up and she actually is not merely acting for that, what has come up, it is for the frustration of the shoes that is left so often in the middle of the living room. And this is the opportunity that she has, or the person has, to vent their feelings. And it is for, like, the parents will know that sometimes when we beat the children, we beat them for all 2 years, things that they have done that we fail to deal with. And so my whole thing is that we must know how to confront in a healthy way. We must get, when we are trying to resolve conflict with it in the family, we must enter into it, not to argue, not to win, but to resolve, not to discuss and bring about a healthy resolution where things could get back as normal. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Pastor Francis, and we're sure you're going to have more wisdom nuggets for us as we move forward. Javon, I want to give you an opportunity to rejoin the conversation, right? And again, we're asking this to ensure that we get a youthful perspective. I wanted to say younger, but I'm going to say a youthful perspective. Why is it important that people try to resolve conflicts so that they win or that they feel better?
I think it's important that at the end of a conflict, or at the end of conflict resolution, that there is mutual understanding, or at least a general consensus at the end of a matter, right? Because the reality of it is, when there's certain conflicts, some persons will be right, some persons may be wrong, or there may be certain aspects that you can learn from on each side where it may have been just a matter of miscommunication, right? So when I say conflict resolution should be a matter of wanting to win, no. I personally, from experience, if I have a conflict that I'm dealing with, even if the decision at the end is favorable to me, sometimes I feel bad. And you really shouldn't, right? But there's just that feeling, all right, probably because this person didn't understand exactly what it is I was trying to say. I would probably take you into a personal experience. I went home just recently over the Christmas holiday for vacation. And my first sister, who is approaching adulthood this year, had a little bit of an altercation with me. There was a situation that we had, and I started speaking to her about it. And I guess at that stage, she probably didn't feel like anything was wrong, you know? And it's, being honest, it's quite difficult. I know it's difficult, particularly at the age of 16, 17, when you're getting closer to that adulthood, you can't tell anybody anything, right? So I decided to take it to my parents, and we had a little conversation about it. And honestly, it left her feeling bad at the end, because what I said was genuinely correct. It was just a matter of being able to accept it. So that's why I say in conflict resolution, it's not always about just trying to want to win, but there has to be that level of understanding. Because I would not lie, I was blocked on WhatsApp for a couple of days after that little conflict. That's all the security on this panel. But anyway, like I say, I don't think you should ever go into conflict resolution with the mindset of just trying to win. I think it should be a matter of having both sides understand the point putting forward, and always a matter of trying to resolve it as best as possible, making sure that either party leaves understanding the perspective shared, and whichever perspective tends to be the correct one, at least both parties have that understanding. Okay, I was wrong in this instance. I probably may have felt that you could have done better here. So that kind of feeling is a feeling that you must be able to walk away from that situation, being able to talk and not being blocked for a couple of days. Basically, that's my point for that question.
Thank you. And I think that's important. It's not so much about being right? It's about doing, quote unquote, the right thing in some situations so that everybody leaves feeling like they were heard and understood, which brings us back to Pastor Henry. We do have a question from the chat that I'll raise after, but it brings us back to the whole concept of the power of agreement and setting, visions and goals, etc., so that we understand if things happen, this is how we address it. So Pastor Henry, could you just talk to us a bit about that?
So if you are going into the conflict and wanting to be God, you must want to be God in every possible way. So just as God, when we get into conflict with God, before we ask for forgiveness, he has already forgiven us. So that if you want to go into a conflict being right, and you know that you are right, you must be willing to forgive the other person, even before the other person asks for forgiveness. In other words, you must be premeditating forgiveness, because that's what God does for us. And I'm not saying that we should God, but it's something that we should strive at in our situations, so that we are wrong, we are hurt, we know it. I mean, the person has done something wrong. Your wife has left you and has gone with somebody else. You're wrong. It causes a conflict. Your husband has done the same thing, cheated on you. And you have to now resolve that conflict. You have to be at a level where you are willing to forgive, and to, as Pastor Griffith talks about the fire burning up, you have to throw water. You personally have to pour water on the fire that is in you, so that when you sit down and talk, you can talk to the person and that you can converse in such a way as to how we are going to avoid this problem occurring again in the future. If you can't do that, and it's somehow, it's name calling and what have you have lost. But one of the great things about dealing with conflicts is when you can pre-plan, when you can foresee issues that may cause problems, and you can come to agreements on them. Or when you have as Pastor Francis said, when you have the problem that the shoe is left always in the dining room or in the sitting room, how are we going to resolve it? Well, you may not get, you may feel as God that is not the place for it, and I don't want it there. It's my living room and it's not going to be there. Well, you could go in with that attitude, but then the best way to find a resolution to that is, what can we do to fix this problem? This causes me pain. And when both persons understand that, and then you're willing to talk about it, okay, so just kick it under the chair when you see it. I would pick it up afterwards. let me try to get out the habit. I'm going to try to break the habit. I have been doing this since I was a child, and you have to understand that marriage doesn't take away some of those childish practices that were, you know, embedded in me. And the shoe is just an example. There are a number of other things that we, husband and wife, run into serious conflicts with, and they don't take the time to understand that the person who is causing the offense may have developed those things from childhood. And it would take a little while to break that situation, to get the change and to, but if you are confrontational and you're always hammering at the person, you're not helping the person. And so you have to come to some agreement. How are we going to work to help you in this situation? Of course, you as the person, you're not going to be God and play, well, you know, that is how I was, you know, and this is who I am. I'm the man of the house. And if I put it there, I'm the one who paying the bills and you don't have anything to, anytime you take that, you may think that you have solved the conflict remains. And so you have to work with the person and talk with them and to come to some sort of agreement as to what should be done in resolving the conflict, what could be done in resolving the conflict.
So,
Doctor, can I come in here?
Sure, definitely, Pastor Francis.
Okay, yes, because Pastor Henry, he did strike a valid note here with forgiveness. And from where we sit, I think we all know that conflict will never, it will only seemingly, it will look as though it has been resolved, but it could never be resolved in a peaceful way where harmony is brought back into the home, into the relationship, where there is not a willingness to forgive. That is a vital point. There must be a willingness to forgive. And I will go a bit further than that and say forget. Forget meaning not that it has been the memory is erased. If God chooses to do that, all well. But we forget. How do we know we forgive? When things that would have reminded us of what took place then does not stir within us animosity, bitterness, and wanting to take revenge. Let me give an example here. Guy came home and he caught his wife in adultery. He didn't behave unkind. He did not beat her. But all he asked for, when the guy who he caught his wife with was leaving, he asked him for a quarter. And the guy gave him the quarter. And every day he sat down on the table to dine with his wife. He just takes out the quarter and he puts it there. He just put it there. And that was the end of the relationship because the wife could not take that. She had to walk out. So sometimes we do things and we think that what we have done is going to solve the problem, but it only give the problem more space to grow. For example, the guy who was driving his car and he heard a knock coming from the engine of the car and he did not want to stop, pull on the shoulder. That is going to take time, and resolving conflict takes time sometimes. So what he did, he turned up the volume, the radio, so that he would not hear the noise coming from the engine of the car. And that only gave it more time to break down on the busy highway, causing embarrassment and causing a lot of cost to repair the car. So sometimes that is what we do. We see, we hear, but we lose ourselves in something else, drowning out the real thing that we need to stop and attend to.
If I may comment here quickly, I want to suggest, right, that you would find, I'm not going to tell you the prevalence, you will find the element of values that are at stake. I'm saying that very frequently in conflict, it is values that are at stake. The father, the girl, 12 years old, want to go partying with the girls in her class who just go and come in at 12 o'clock for the night or 1 o'clock. And daddy saying that can't happen, and the girl mad and cruel and behaving bad, and there's war in the house. Daddy says the woman left And she said, we can see them, right? I'm saying that values are at stake and decisions have to be made. Let's go back about in Proverbs 25, verse 24. The Bible says it's better to dwell in the corner of a house top than with a brawling woman in a white house. Now, let's not get taken away by the sex or the person being here, the woman. The key thing I want to emphasize here is the word brawling. And here is how 3 dictionary Bible translators put it. The CEB says, calls the word brawling contentious. The Jewish Complete Translation says nagging. Another Bible says bitter tongue. You understand? So we need to understand, I repeat, that oftentimes, is it really wrong? I ask the question, is it really wrong to expect to win? And when we say win, is win really doing justice to the issues when in fact what is at stake is values? And to what extent are we asking ourselves or others to give in or to compromise a value in our value system? I may end by saying that the problem is that when we compromise our values, we do more harm than good. I pause.
I beg to differ. I beg to differ. It's the cause of conflict. I do not have to compromise my value to accept and to respect another person's values. So let me say that again. I do not have to compromise my values to respect another person's values. And we may be as far as the East is from the West, as far as our values are concerned. And so it is what is causing all of the conflict in the world today, not only in families, but in the entire world. And Pastor Griffith referred to Ukraine over and over. And the truth is we live in the West and we do not take the time to understand or to try to appreciate what the Russians may be saying and their reason for wanting Ukraine to be subjected to them, right? And so we have to take to understand each other. And although we may not agree, we do not necessarily need to have a situation that is out of hand where we can't sit down and understand each other. One of the things with conflict, just like any kind of a conflict, unless you annihilate the other person, if that conflict is going to be resolved, you have to sit down, accept each other's point of view, and find some form of resolution. So if you and your wife is having a conflict that is so bad and it continues, it's either you separate or you're endless your way. But if you are going to have to live together, you know, well, you can't live together. Doesn't matter what it is. And so it's a matter of respecting the other person's values. And I think this is one of the problems oftentimes with parents and children, and oftentimes we lose our children because we try to impose our values on them, not understanding where they are. And what we need to do is to understand where they are and try to help them to understand what our values are and let them compare, let them see the benefits, let them see so that they can make a choice and they can make a judgment as to which value system they want to follow. Right. So, yeah.
And Sister Sutherland, just to answer Pastor Griffith's question, if it was a question, to me, it is wrong to want to win if I want to win at any cost. Mm-hmm. So if I want to win the fight, it doesn't mean the conflict is between my wife and I and the 3 children takes the wife's side and I want to win the fight and I do anything to win the fight. bust up head, mash up pot, throw things out of the window, and I came out the winner. It is wrong to want to win at any cost, because sometimes the cost costs more than the fight.
Thank you. So I want to go to the comment from Natalie. Persons should really try not to see conflict in a totally negative light. If they continue to, it contributes to issues not being resolved and the development of ill health, especially mental, because people tolerate to keep peace and do not apply the courage to face the issue. Having said that, she asks the question, going back to how we communicate so that the person listens with understanding. How is a member of the family to be truly heard if they choose the right way of communicating? Like, I felt this way, instead of saying you did this, but the recipient responds, you choose to feel so. Okay, go ahead, Pastor Henry.
No. Just say it again for
Right.
the last part for me, please.
How is a member of the family to be truly heard if they choose the right way of communicating? I felt this way, but the recipient's response is, you choose to feel so.
So that in a case like that, once you have done your part in the conflict, once you have done your part, I think that you are no longer in conflict. That's the key about it. When you do your part, you are no longer in conflict. So the conflict may now exist with the other person. They're not talking to you. They block you on WhatsApp. But as far as you are concerned, you are happy. You are all right. Not a problem with me. You could do what you want. And let me say this too. It takes a level of maturity to resolve and deal with conflicts.
Yeah, man.
I have had a lot of friends 20 years ago who thought that I was crazy because as a Pentecostal minister, I was getting married to an Adventist woman who was staunch in her beliefs that in keeping the Sabbath. Okay, so 22 years have gone. We haven't killed each other. We haven't sacrificed each other. We have had one understanding that we are working towards the kingdom. We are working towards getting to heaven. We are going to make that our goal. And if when we get up there, there are Sabbath keepers, we're going to visit the Sabbath keepers on Saturdays in heaven. And she would visit those who are keeping the Sunday, who are doing worshiping on Sundays. So very easy to resolve the conflict. Of course, those, if you have such a kind of mindset about heaven, you need certainly a Bible class or somebody to teach you about heaven, so that some of the things that we treat as being conflicting with a level of maturity, if we learn to manage the little things, it grows. And so when some of the more serious things come about, we deal with them with that level of maturity, and they're not so big after all.
Thank you, Natalie.
Pastor Henry, we have to realize that not every conflict will be resolved, because conflict is between two or more persons. And sometimes we enter into this to bring about a resolution, thinking that it must be resolved. We cannot do anything for another person who does not want to change. So it's not all every conflict will be resolved. And to answer the person's question, after we have done all that is required of us, we must realize that this is a person, so they want to walk away, we cannot stop them, but we know that we have done everything, and we do not bring about, make ourselves feel guilty because the relationship didn't work. The man wants to go. I, as a counselor, I will prefer him to walk out of the home, go his separate ways, than to encourage him to stay and kill his wife.
Yes.
I will do it. So we have to get into this thing with those understanding, or sometimes we may cause people to be killed when they should have walked away. And here I cannot be on a program without saying that I learned from Brother Pastor Griffith, a pause.
What charge you?
And that leads us right into the next segment, which more or less addresses scenarios where there's an extreme case and potentially cannot be resolved. And so I listed 4: children outside of marriage, a child death potentially at the hands of one parent, whether it's accident or otherwise, extreme financial burdens, and the issue of love and respect between men and women. So having children outside of marriage, a child death at the hands of one of the parents, whether by accident, or intentional, extreme financial burdens, and love and respect. How do we deal with issues that are potentially unresolvable?
Can I take the first one, Dr. Sutherland? Because oftentimes when, well, let me say, I had a case once where the gentleman had a child outside of marriage. And I personally, the lady was mad, she was angry, she was frustrated, and I did not blame the gentleman. At the end of the day, I did not blame the gentleman. The truth of the matter is that both of them were married, and it was the lady's expectations that we are going to live to ourselves. We are not going to have relationships, because that's the type of family from which she came, very strong Catholic background. The gentleman, on the other hand, was one where his father had children that he didn't know some of the brothers. He only heard about them. The brothers that he knew and some of the sisters had children with different men, different women, different men. So that he was in that environment, brought up in that environment. And so his expectation was different to the wife's expectation. And sadly, you know, he played around and somebody got pregnant. And he thought that, you know, like he wasn't going to be like his father and disown his children. He was going to own his children and care for his children even. But that was the part that he was, as far as he was concerned, I'm doing the right thing. I'm not going to, you know, behave like my father and disown my child, and, you know, nobody know about her going to be my father's child. But the adultery part, you know, it was common. And so I think that couples should, on issues like these, before you go blaming, make sure you have agreements in place. Make sure that you speak about these things, because as I said, it's your thoughts that creates the expectations of the other person's behavior. And so express your thoughts to the individual. If you expect your husband to behave like a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, not all of us to behave that way, in that way that we, you know, some of us do let down the office. But if you expect him to behave like that, then let him know that, you know, he needs to behave like a preacher. If you think that your wife should not be out there on Carnival Monday and Tuesday playing mass, don't wait until Carnival Monday and Tuesday come to start a quarrel that she out there playing mass. Discuss it with her. Make sure you deal with what you have in your mind to be a conflict, and you come to some form of resolution. Okay, so that in dealing with things like that, the outside children and what have you, and so on, I'm saying that that's something that you need to decide. Don't take it for granted that both people have the same mindset as far as, you know, the type of family that you want to raise.
If I might come in, I would say that I maintain that conflict means there's war. And it is, I don't need to say that I do not want to be in war, because houses can get blown up, cities, cars, my leg, my arm, everything can happen. They don't make sense. The Bible says two cannot walk together unless they agree. And I want to say that a stone once released from your hand is not a boomerang. That's the word. it doesn't come back, it goes. A man who goes out there and has, I say a man, has a marital relationship, that can be pulled back. It can be stopped from continuing, but it happened already. The baby done born. The man done said the worst thing to the wife already. Can't take back that. Well, in that case, it seems as though, are we willing to stay together? How much do we cherish this union? Then how can we bury this ship? How can we agree, like, yes, I sin, let me go on. Is there anything that can reasonably be done to repair this? And I think that is the position that we got to come to. Otherwise, we can remain in a warfare. And like somebody say, it don't make sense. Like we kill one another, somebody must die. Fight till the kill. It don't make sense. I pause.
And there are some things, as much as we will want to be prepared to, and we may want to ask all the questions before we get married. Because we are human beings, we will never be able to ask all the questions. So there are things that will pop up only during the marriage. Only during the marriage that is going to be revealed, because we are still human beings and will not be able to deal with everything. So then we have to, when it has happened during the marriage, because what Pastor Henry talked about, I don't think it was a child being born before the two persons were married. I think that was
they were married,
infidelity stepped in, pregnancy took place. Now it's to sit down like two level-headed persons and deal with that incident, deal with that which has happened, and see how I cannot sit down and say how it will happen, how it will resolve, how best it can be resolved in the most peaceful way, causing harmony. I would want to say that, because it could work out. I know people who have owned up to the mistakes and they have changed their behavior and they live happily after. It could happen, but there must be the willingness to forgive, forget, and move on, and not bring it back. Because sometimes we say we forgive and we forget, but the slightest thing that happened, we bring it back up, we dig up the skeleton, and we never gave the body the time to rotten and disintegrate. So we always pull up the cup and we get this stinking smell. That's a good word for the program. So if not, sorry, we get this stink and we talk about it again. So these are things that we'll have to sit down and deal with, the two individuals. And sometimes it warrants a second party, a third party coming in to put things together and to help us get back on that footing that we need to be on.
But you see, the thing there is that we assume that when we are marrying people in the church and we say to them, we use the Christian marriage book or whatever have you, leaving all other and cleave unto her, that the people understand what we are talking about. There are people in the Caribbean. Who have been born, who live in this dispensation, who do not know anything about living a life that there is a value system where you have one wife. Right? There are people like that, and honestly, they honestly believe, there are men who honestly believe that it is all right. It is quite right to have children outside of marriage. So when we say that this guy is in conflict, that guy is not in conflict. The wife is the one who is in conflict, who believes that the man should have one wife. But the man is not in conflict. The woman is in conflict. The woman is the one who has the conflict. And so how do you get them as a Christian preacher, you want to see them living right, yes, but you want to see the guy living right. But how do you, what do you say in a situation like that? You can't blame the gentleman. You can't blame him because that is his system of belief. That is his, you have to respect his belief and help them to understand when they're sitting there that they need to come to some agreement going forward. You see, so that you just can't say, well, you're wrong, you should. And I think this is the approach that we take as pastors. That, and let me tell you something, there are some people in the church, there are some men in the church who you have taught about fornication, but it ain't settling their heart as yet, you know. Right? They are married, but they still feel that it is all right to have somebody on the outside. And they're the church. And so until the Holy Spirit, we get the Holy Spirit to convict them and to convince, you know, and, you know, we have to take a different approach in teaching them. And, you know, until such a time that they're convinced, when they're married, when that person gets married and you don't go through those areas with that person to make sure that both individuals are on the same page, then they're going to have problems. You always have conflicts.
Yeah, I heard a pastor on a podcast say, when you get married, you don't commit to what you know, you actually commit to what you don't know. Because it's after you get married that it starts and you start seeing things you don't know. And I think we did mention it in the lead up to this program that two persons are common law and they're finally about to get married, and then there's a change in behavior of one of the spouses and it causes conflict. And so when you walk down the aisle, you're not just walking down thinking of all the lovely things about this person, but you're committing to the things that you don't know. And then another thought I'm having, I'm going to ask if you ascribe to that, you commit to what you don't know. And I'm thinking in terms of conflict resolution, I saw this post, I think it was on Instagram, where a husband broke a glass in the kitchen. Wife came downstairs later on in the night without knowing the glass was broken, saw a piece of glass on the ground, and she was about to quarrel, but then got convicted. He had cleaned up the majority of it. And if you are the helpmeet and you see this piece of glass, weren't you not sent to pick it up before one of the children stepped on it? And so that could have been a conflict. And I figure it convicted me because I am one of those who quarrel about the dishes in the sink. But it reinforced in me that you have to shed your lens when you're dealing with someone else who, as you had said earlier, I think it was Pastor Henry or Pastor Griffith, who come up with all these behaviors that have been learned for so many years. And then you kind of weigh the cost of, is this really worth expending so much energy to get into an argument over? Or seeing that you were here to wash your dish anyway, just wash the two dishes in the sink. And so, you know, you see a great reduction in things that would have had you. Javon, you talk about being blocked on WhatsApp. I can block you in the same house, you know, and so it reduced the whole tug and pull of just walking around a house as if you're the only person in it when you're not, and having just time to concentrate on other things, on things that are more meaningful. So just wanted to give two thoughts on how, you know, this conversation is impacting and how it linked to someone else, how it linked to something else I would have heard that checked me in my spirit about how I perceive conflict in the family. Believe it or not, everyone, it is 8:57 p.m. So I want to give our panelists the opportunity to offer some closing comments. I'm going to start with Javon. I'm going to go to Pastor Francis, Pastor Griffith, and then to Pastor Henry. We want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight, including Pastor Chandler, who's in transit, but we see he is still listening. Thank you for being here. Javon, over to you.
All right. Again.
I think we're getting some feedback. Hold one second. someone's mic is on, can you just ask everyone to mute the mic so we get the benefit of hearing what Javon is saying? Thank you. Javon, over to you.
Right. So again, I just want to express thanks to everyone who came out to the panel discussion this evening. Appreciate the comments that were made as well and the questions. In closing, I just basically want to leave 4 things, simple 4 things in dealing with conflict and conflict resolution. I just want to encourage everybody here to listen, to understand, to try and communicate effectively, and above all, keep God at the center of you and your family and whatever situations it is may arise in the family. I think a lot of the time, keeping God at the center, we tend to misunderstand how important that is, because there are certain conflicts and certain situations a lot of persons may encounter where it is the only thing holding that particular conflict together is the fact that there is a love for God, a desire to serve God. And I think that is important. We can't lose focus of that, especially dealing with one of the first institutions and one that was ordained by God, the family. So thank you very much for having me on the panel tonight, guys. I'm looking forward to many more discussions like this tonight. I enjoy being able to speak from a youthful perspective about issues like this, family, because I too myself deem myself as someone that is heavily family oriented. I enjoy having discussions like these. So thank you very much for having me tonight. Looking forward to much more discussions like this.
Okay, I think I was asked to go second. My short closing comment is that never take the family conflict that should be dealt with by the family outside to other persons who will contribute in you doing and saying the wrong thing. I don't know if you all dealt with it, Pastor Henry, but I remember when we were putting it together, you made a nice example, because sure, the Bible, there are family conflicts. We have David and Jonathan, we have Joseph and his brethren, but the one you stress on, Pastor Henry, when we were planning was Jacob and Esau. I think was that you did how it was being resolved so peacefully when Jacob was going back to reconcile with Esau. He did a lot of things that we have come to the end, so we cannot get into it. And I thought that was very beautiful, the way how Jacob handled the conflict with his brother Esau, and they were reconciled. That's my comment.
Well, my quick comment in closing would be that I think Javon mentioned it just now. Families are the first institution in society. And I say first in sense of priority. It's a place where people they want to feel love, they want to feel belonging, and they want to feel safe. I want to emphasize that conflict, in my words, is a dangerous temperament. This is me, right? My definition. That can be and must be managed at all costs. And under no circumstances should any member of the family allow selfishness to threaten the well-being of this vital institution. We would have reached the highest level of development when our family becomes more important than us. And my final words are, pick your battles, focus on the present, and know when to let go. Pastor
Yeah, before Pastor Henry speaks, I think it was Pastor Chandler who had offered the 4 points on Jacob and Esau. I think he's still in transit, so I'm just going to read it, and then Pastor Henry, you can expound on it. Genesis 13, 32 to 33. And what Pastor Chandler had said was that when there is conflict, you need mediators. And by mediators, he meant respected and unbiased ministers of the gospel who can sit into the conversation. You need prayer. You need presence, gifts and tokens, and you need to confront openly in a spirit of grace and forgiveness. And so he said, this is what Jacob had done to Esau when he was looking for reconciliation. He sent persons ahead just to feel out what Esau was feeling. He prayed to God about it. He sent presents to Esau, and then he confronted the challenge in a spirit of grace and forgiveness. Pastor Henry, over to you. You're muted. You're muted.
Yes. So here are 5 basic points in managing your conflicts. We are talking about the conflict exists. It's within you and you know something is wrong, you're feeling it. Raise the issue early. Talk to the person that you're feeling conflicted with. Talk to them early. Don't allow it to fester. Manage your emotions. And by that, I'm saying that be careful to avoid playing the blame game, to avoid raising your voice, manage your emotions. Show empathy so that if the person hurt you, always be willing to forgive and to understand the person's point of view. And 4, practice active listening so that be attentive, listen with empathy, look at the person's body language. You could learn a lot from what they're saying by the way they're responding. And when you are criticized, acknowledge criticism. So treat criticism as constructive feedback. And that should help in managing the conflict that is on hand. I think we still need Dr. Sutherland to talk more about conflict resolution. What happens when the marriage breaks down and there is a divorce? How does that, where do we go from there? How do you resolve that? Things of nature when there are serious financial issues, as you mentioned, and
Yes.
you can't find a way out. So I think definitely we need to hold that slot next 2 Saturdays from now, just for the continuation.
I think so, Pastor Henry. And what we would say to the participants tonight is if you have questions or scenarios, feel free to use pseudonyms. Send us those questions or those queries via email so that once we have our experts on, they can address those scenarios so that you get real feedback on the issues.
Yep.
All right, so this is the end, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Real Talk Family Life, building shatterproof families, one brick at a time. Thank you, Javon Andrew, Pastor John Francis, Pastor Joseph Griffith, Pastor Anthony Henry, and Pastor David Chandler, who helped us build this program this evening. We appreciate you all joining with us each and every time we're on and staying to the end, even though we've run a bit over this evening. Get home safely to those of you who have to travel, and for those of you who are home, have a great night and enjoy your weekend. Good night, everyone.
Lord bless you all. Have a good night.
Good night and God bless everyone.